With Alberta's municipal election just around the corner, candidates are out in full force, pounding in signs, knocking on doors, and filling up social media feeds in hope to winning over voters. But once the ballots are counted, the results declared, and the new council is sworn in, the real work begins. For many freshly elected officials, those first few months can feel like drinking from a fire hose. An overwhelming rush of information, decisions, and responsibilities. Personalities can clash, priorities can collide, and the learning curve is steep. Yet, how a council navigates those early days can set the tone for the entire term. Now, in today's episode, we're asking simple questions. What really makes a council successful in the first few months? How can it change in leadership, reshape a community? And what is the true value of a mayor, reeve, a councillor in 2025? To answer those questions and so much more, we turn to two experts who have spent decades working alongside councils across Alberta and beyond. George Cuff, governance expert, consultant, and author of Leading the Real Value of a Mayor and Council, The Mayor, and Executive Policy Governance. And Ian McCormack, president of Strategic Steps Incorporated and author of Who is Driving the Greater? The DNA of Great Leaders, and UnCivil Society. Together, George and Ian will share insights on how councils can hit the ground running, what pitfalls to avoid, and yes, we'll even get to the bottom of that all-important question, who is really driving the greater? In the heart of every thriving community lies a well-crafted strategic plan. But crafting such a plan requires expertise, experience, and a deep understanding of local needs. Enter Strategic Steps, your partner in municipal strategic planning. Strategic Steps' team of experts have years of experience in municipal administration. At Strategic Steps, they just don't develop plans. They co-create homegrown strategies tailored to your unique community. They listen, they collaborate, they empower your community to thrive. Contact Strategic Steps today and take the first step towards a brighter future for your municipality. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started. Thank you, George. Thank you, Ian, for both sitting down with me and talking about this upcoming Alberta municipal election 2025, but in some sense, a larger picture of just municipal elections as a whole. This election is coming at a very apathetic time in the province of Alberta. We are not seeing as many candidates put their name forward, and that might mean that they're waiting until after Labor Day, but that also could mean that they have no interest in actually putting their name forward anymore. George, I want to start with you with a very simple question, but it's an overarching one. You've written a book about the real value of mayor and council. How would you define that value in today's context, seeing what you're seeing across the municipal landscape in Alberta?
Chris, the organization, the structure, the maintenance, the ongoing activities, the cutting of grass, the paying of bills, the preparing a budget, the constructing a new facility. I mean, most of those things can be done and are done by your municipal administration. And in actual fact, councils often err when they get themselves involved in trying to help out, in quotation marks, when in actual fact the help is neither wanted nor needed. What happens, though, in terms of councils and where they really add value is the one thing that administrations don't do and can't do is to truly represent public interest. Public interest is represented by your elected council. That's who people rely on to step forward and say, this is what the community is saying to me. And that means being able to build in some degree of public participation, public exposure, public thoughts into what are priorities, what are the things that we think our municipality really needs to tackle. What are the things that perhaps we need to get out of? And how well are we engaging with our populace? So I would argue that setting priorities, engaging with the public, developing an overall game plan, trying to decide what the community should look like 5 or 10 years hence, those are things where council needs to weigh in, and then to provide a general oversight role. So all of us operate in a one over environment where we have somebody that we report to, and that one over typically provides some oversight of some kind. And that's essentially what a council does. It provides oversight of a chief administrative officer and the organization as a whole. And no one else is equipped and, quite frankly, has the mandate to provide either the public representation or the administrative oversight.
Ian, are we seeing a blurring of that line in the municipal world in 2025? We are seeing more and more candidates step forward thinking that they're going to be the next administration when they are, and you've written a book literally about this, about who's driving the grader. Are we seeing that blurring of lines where municipal candidates are not knowing what the role that they're actually getting involved in and not be governance, but they want to be administration?
I think in a lot of cases that's true. Obviously, and I shouldn't say obviously because it's perhaps not. The returning candidates who have been in office for one or more terms ought to be much more clear on that topic. They're not always, but they ought to be. For the new candidates who are getting involved for whatever reason that they have chosen, the understanding of the role of a governor is certainly less of everything. People don't understand necessarily what the role is, the amount of time that's going to take, the adversarial nature of a well-functioning democracy, local democracy, or any of those sorts of things. I'm reminded of a quote from the city manager in Cranbrook who told me, actually sent me an email a week or two ago, and he says, about councils, if you teach them how to tighten the lug nuts on the loader, they're going to want to tighten the lug nuts on the loader. So a lot of the requirement, I think, for making sure that they begin on the straight and narrow and with a clear understanding of their role comes before councils are elected and things like candidate workshops and research. George's books, for example, are a great source of information for that. Then it comes with a really good focused orientation into what the governance role is, what the administrative role is, and the gulf, hopefully, between the two, and then ongoing professional development. And as a recognition, I think, on behalf of councillors who've been in office for a year or more, in response to the question, is the job what you thought it was going to be? The answer is almost universally no, that the job is more. It's more time, it's more effort, it's more energy, it's more conflict, all of those sorts of things that they may not really have been expecting from a part-time gig for which they receive little remuneration or none in the case of some places like in Newfoundland, which is also having an election at about the same time that Alberta is. So in fact, that there are few jurisdictions going to the polls this year. So that's my long answer to your relatively short question, Chris.
I've come to expect that from Ian McCormack. Is always expect a long answer for a short question. But George, you've also sat as a mayor, but you've also consulted with municipalities from across Alberta and beyond. When did we start seeing this blurring of lines between what the council does and what administration does? Because it didn't happen last week. It's been going on for some time now. Can you point to a moment when it started to change and more council members started to try to proverbial drive the grader or change the lug nuts or sort of dictate where the snow removal was going to happen that week?
Without wanting to date myself too badly, I would say that the blurring of lines existed when I began as a department head, which most people forget about, in Spruce Grove as the director of Parks and Recreation. I dealt with a council in those days who had their hands over everything. And I consulted sort of beginning with 1977 and beyond with municipalities, and the degree of overlap was quite profound in the early days. And a lot of it was rural driven, where rural municipalities couldn't imagine having a council that didn't have its hands on the grader, as Ian would know, in terms of driving the grader, one of his books, good book. I think my response would be that there's always been a degree of overlap. I would argue that what has happened is that the administration has become much more professional over the years. Council still has a tendency to want to get themselves involved in administrivia. So, I mean, you see it every time you see an ad in the paper. Somebody wants to get elected to manage City Hall. Well, it's the wrong word. They're not getting elected to manage City Hall. They're getting elected to govern the community. And so you've still got the overlap. You still have some of the same kinds of scenarios. I would argue that the administration from about 1990 onward had become much more professional. They have many more people that have academic backgrounds that are attuned to what goes on with local governments, and they have a better understanding. So there should be a wealth of understanding of why we need to have clear separation and so on. And I think some of that happened, particularly in urban and larger urban municipalities. Smaller rural has still been stuck with this whole track of, I got elected to manage public works. And if you said otherwise, in many municipalities right across Canada, every province, every territory, they would look at you with some degree of shock. I mean, isn't that why I got elected? I got elected to manage City Hall. I remember doing work in Powell River at one point, and there's a picture of Councillor Crawford with his broom in hand because he got elected to come in and sweep out City Hall. His job was to get rid of everybody, and he was astounded that I was telling them otherwise. Because he was going to manage. He was in telling the swimming pool operators how to run the swimming pool. All of that kind of stuff has gone on, Chris, from ad nauseum and from ad infinitum. I mean, this has gone on from the beginning of time. It's got better in terms of a more educated population. It's got better because there are more Ians of the world that are out there providing guidance to municipalities in terms of what they should and should not do. So some of that, the education level, the province has got a little bit more engaged. They're fearful of saying anything that's overly dramatic, and therefore they hire people like McCormack or Cuff to come in and say those things. But so some of these things have mitigated against the ongoing nature of over-involvement in local government by those that are elected to govern. I would argue that unless you have done a really good job of the beforehand work, i.e., Ian made reference to that, doing some pre-election counseling, some pre-election orientation. So, and doing a seminar is called "So You're Thinking of Running for Office," and then put on a seminar 3 or 4 months in advance of an election. You would have a better shot at convincing people that they aren't getting elected to manage the community. The orientations that we do after the election are useful, but they would be a lot more useful if the audience you were talking to wasn't hearing it for the first time. It would be a lot more useful if they had figured out, gee, I don't want to get elected if I can't come in and manage public works. That's exactly why I want to get elected. I can't drive the grader, but I'd like to tell the other guy how to do it. If you had an opportunity to talk to every councillor across Canada 3 months before the election, which is what I think should be happening, by the way, and I think the province should make it mandatory, that if you want to run to office, you've got to attend a pre-election seminar. I think you'd have a much better shot at it. And secondly, the orientations which are now mandated in Alberta should go on right across Canada. I'm not saying that as, so I can earn money as a consultant. It just makes good sense. And I've said it for 45 years. You ought to have the orientations for every council. They ought to be done very quickly. And then there ought to be a mandated follow-up halfway through a term to say, so what page are we on? How far did we get in this process? Anyway, I've just said a whole lot, but I think, there's a lot that could be done. And I could say as a consultant that the fact that communities don't do it, I mean, that's good news for people like Ian McCormack and George Cuff, because there's all kinds of work out there. Because within 3 to 6 months, we're getting calls saying, gee, our council is well into the weeds. Can you come and help us?
Okay, so first off, I have to clarify that you said there needs to be more Ian McCormacks, but there can only be one Ian McCormack and there can only be one George Cuff. And let's just put that out there because that's all I need is more Ian McCormacks in this world. But we talk about the educational portion, which is true. There needs to be more education done from the pre-election cycle and then the post-election cycle. But internally, candidates need to look and reflect on what they actually want to get out of the role as a counselor, as a mayor, as a reeve. Now, Ian, you've written a book about the great DNA of leaders. What traits are essential for counselors, for mayors, for reeves to step into this role? Because I can imagine if you wrote that book in 1990, the traits would be completely different than what they need to be now, because now you need to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, because you need to worry about provincial jurisdictional issues, federal jurisdictional issues. You're not just worrying about the potholes, the roads, and the parks. You're worrying about a range of issues. So what makes a good DNA of a leader in 2025?
Wow. Well, first of all, we're not looking for 7 or 9 or whatever of the same person. We are looking for people with different attributes, different aptitudes, different ages, perspectives, the length of time they've spent in town. Really, you want your board of directors for your municipality to be broadly reflective of the makeup of the community. Now, there are some things, some societal or economic barriers to that. It's hard to get young mums, for example. We started looking at things like daycare or child minding during council meetings, but still it becomes an issue. In some of the interviews for my latest book on the UnCivil Society, I was listening to people talk about some of the barriers that are being put up between themselves and their desire for public office. Even I've had conversations with people who are running or interested in running for in the current election, and a lot of that is testing the waters around would I be good at this? Would I not be good at this? I think to George's point, the fact that those people are reaching out now, I think is a really good sign for those particular people. However, so what I think we need, first of all, is that diversity of perspectives, a recognition that one of my mentors, Dennis Palman, was really adamant early on in my career about reminding me that council is an it, not a they. That the decisions that come out of that entity are collective decisions, not individual decisions. So there's an expectation that you subjugate your own desires, will, perspective to that of whatever the majority has decided by the time they put their hands up or not put their hands up. So to me, there's a recognition there of the role of council as a whole. I think you need people who have genuine goodwill. Those people who are interested in serving the public versus just wanting to be the boss and telling people what to do. You're looking for people who have that long-term desire to do good for their community over the long term. People who want to make their town or their village or their county a place that their grandkids want to move to. So that genuine interest, which gets us into the place where we're looking for strategists rather than operational or tactical people. George made reference to this several times, where we're looking at people who can theme a series of items and look at governance. So rather than just complaining about potholes and faded lines on Main Street and the fact the garbage doesn't get picked up particularly often or there are leaks in the water pipes, we're looking from a council perspective at asset management and sustainably funding our infrastructure and letting the experts we've hired actually do that. We meaning the municipal management team. So long-term thinking, a willingness to compromise, a recognition that fundamentally we put our hands up or we don't put our hands up in response to some request for a policy or a bylaw or a resolution of some sort. And there needs to be some quid pro quo, a little bit of give and take on what's important to me versus what's important to you. And there's work that's required. Statutorily, the work of an municipal elected official isn't very much. You have to show up to meetings. Really, that's kind of it. But the good elected official is the person who is willing to show up to those community events and actively participate and probably has been active in their community for some time. The final thing is just a knowledge, and one of the chapters in my books is titled "No Strategy Survives First Contact with Reality." So I'll just finish this portion by saying there needs to be a recognition that something's going to get in the way of the ideal future state that you as an individual or a collective have created. So that sense that we're looking at the slow and steady wins the race, that we're not going to change things immediately. There are some things we can't change for legislative reasons or others, and we change what we can over the course of the term and beyond. So those are some of the things for individually and collectively. I think that that's what we would see in a good functioning councillor and using that DNA of great leaders to which you referenced.
This question's for both of you, but I want to start with George, and I apologize for asking this question to the guy who was elected because it's an important one. Earlier this month, I had a roundtable discussion with three former mayors of Alberta: Barry Morishita from Brooks, Angela Duncan from Alberta Beach, and Janelle Saskew from Marwayne. And in that conversation, we talked about how you need an ego to be a mayor, but you also need an ego to be an elected official because you're putting yourself out there. How important is it to have an ego, but check your ego once you walk into that council table? Because we have a very weak municipal system in this province where everyone has the exact same amount of vote power. The mayor has the exact same vote power as a councillor, and you need a majority of those people around that council table to move any motion or policy. How important is it for ego to play a role in an effective council member or mayor or reeve?
So a couple of things, Chris. I mean, we could talk about some of these things for hours on end. Ian and I do that if we get together. So it's hard to break up the lunch, or to even stop and have something to eat. When you asked about the attributes, and Ian covered that very well, I would say that in terms of attributes, the one thing that stands out for me is the attribute of leadership. You've got to have people that can step up to the plate and see the future. You've got to have people that can draw others along with them. You've got to have people that have the kind of personality that others want to be attached to. They want to help. They want to follow. They want to support. If you don't have that leadership mindset, I think most mayors would really, really struggle. And that kind of ties into your question around ego. I would argue, and again, probably based on my own circumstance, I mean, why would I, at the age of 29, suggest that I could be the mayor of Spruce Grove and replace people that were 55 to 75? And the colleagues around me, by the way, were of similar vintage to me. I was the youngest, but there were others of within 5 to 10 years. Because the community had changed. The community had gone from an older community to a younger community. They're much more willing to embrace me as this young upstart than they would have been 15 years earlier. My ego said, I'm not a follower. My ego said, I'm going to help lead the community. And I think that's what you need as a council member as well, is some degree of, I want to see things get done. And that means I have a stake in this. I think I know better than my neighbor about how to move the yardsticks. And there's ego involved with all of us. Some express it less vocally than some of us do, and less visibly. But I think there's a sense of ego driven in all of us. The key in my mind, Chris, is to marry this notion of ego with this notion of being able to be selfless servant at the same time. And the two are almost contrary. You've got kind of this dynamic at play where you're prepared to say, follow me, I'm leading. And at the same time, I'm here to help. I'm here to lift up. I'm here to move the yardsticks. I'm here to work together. And I'm here for us as a team to take ownership of this, not me individually. And if people have interviewed me over the years, they'll note that I've talked about our council, not mine or not me, because there's a whole lot of good things done in the 12 years that I was mayor, because we had nothing to begin with virtually, and a whole lot of things needed to get done. So the opportunity was there, but I didn't do any of them. I helped lead. And I think you have to have the mindset, and you have to have the sense of ego that I could help do this. I've been in the community for a while. I understand it. I think I understand the people around me, and I'm prepared to get in and participate and help out and so on. I think that's an ego-driven personality. I'm not going to sit back and be the wallflower and say, "Oh no, I can't do that. I can't do that." You'd never hear that out of my lips as a leader. So you want to make sure you've got people that can lead, and then secondly, the same person, the same. It's ironic. The same person is prepared to say "we." The same person is to say "our council," as opposed to "look what I did." No mayor accomplished anything without the support of a majority on council. So what are you doing?
Well,
I
can
mean,
I challenge you on that for a second, George?
you can accomplish something by putting your name out there, but in terms of getting something done, the answer is you don't get it done without a majority support. The thing you can do is you can start the initiative, and it requires ego to do that. Go ahead.
I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on that because you're right. It is a we mentality, but when the shit hits the fan, who gets
Yeah,
blamed? The mayor. Only the
right.
mayor. It's not the council getting blamed. It's only the mayor getting blamed. So how do you square that peg for me? Because if I'm a mayor and I'm saying we, and then when the emergency happens, and then all of a sudden I have to go, oh, I have to take responsibility for not doing this, isn't that a time when the mayor has to say, no, it's a we issue, not a me issue anymore as well?
Yeah, you're right. In many ways, that's when the we becomes that's my responsibility as the mayor. I'm leading this team. I'm leading this ship, and that's on me. I would argue that that's our council. That's our decision. But at the end of the day, the mayor leads the charge, and you need to have you have to have the kind of personality that can not only lead but also accept responsibility for the odd glitch, the odd failure, the odd bit of sand on the road. Obviously, you need to have the kind of personality that can say, "Yeah, you're right. We dropped the ball on that, and that's my responsibility, and I'll make sure that we pick it up and get it moving in the right direction." So, yeah, you're right. The mayor has some responsibility to lead the team. Obviously, I'm not, ignorant of that. I think also, though, that the mayor has a response. I guess we've seen too much of the opposite, Chris, where mayors have made it sound like I'm in charge of everything. We've had people that know the legislation and don't seem to read it and understand it, where it talks about council making decisions and it doesn't say the mayor does. And to me, that's unconscionable that we elect people across our province and across Canada. They get into office and then completely discount, which is why I'm opposed to this whole strong mayor novel or model, rather, that it gives the impression that the mayor is going to pick the CAO, the mayor is going to, drive council in a certain direction. To me, the mayor has to be a person that has authority, has clout, has consideration of others, but can move with the team rather than simply be out there on their own, shouting, "I'm saving the world," when in fact there's nobody behind you and there's none of the world to be saved.
Ian, for yourself, does ego play a role in today's issues that we're facing on council?
I don't know how to follow what George just said, with the exception of yeah, but no, sorry, yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with George, and I grinned thinking through my own experiences about where I have seen what George has said play out, and I think we could even do two different conversations here: one about the chief elected official, and one about all members of council as members of council, because it is kind of that first among equals until we start throwing these strong mayor powers in. And we've seen what's happening in Ontario with that at the moment. I would say in terms of ego, though, there are a couple of places where ego does bring around failure or at least retards progress. The first is trying to please everybody. That there's many an elected official I've run into who has lamented their attempt to try and keep everybody happy all the time, and quickly realize that's a bit of a fool's game. They're not going to be universally admired. So ego in that case must mean something like internal strength, belief in convictions and values, that sort of thing. So it might come across as external ego, but to me, that is having a solid core. The second is the sense of entitlement that sometimes shows up, particularly in smaller municipalities where the remuneration isn't very much. And they're willing to take tickets to the hockey game, or they're quite happy to be front and center on the parade, or flipping burgers, or cutting ribbons, and all of those sorts of things, which sometimes is the mayor's responsibility, of course, as the titular head of the municipality. But those kind of responsibilities and the limelight can be shared as well. And it becomes a real slippery slope as we start moving from ego into ethics. Things like the boiling frog, right? I've often spoken to smaller municipalities. If we use Alberta as an example, I might say to a small town councillor, "Are you okay accepting tickets to the Alberta Junior Hockey League game?" I don't know what the value of that is, but not much. And they say, "Yeah, yeah, that's fine, no problem." And I said, "Well, are you willing to accept tickets to go watch the Oilers on the road in Florida?" And then my question to them is they will often or usually say no. And my question is, then where on this slope have we actually contravened some of the ethics that we get? Now, some municipalities, prudent ones, have policies around gifts and the amounts of what. But to me, that's where we start thinking about that transfer from ego into ethic and value, and that sort of an expression about why are you actually here in the first place? Is it because you want a big person in town? Or is it because you want to make the place better in the long run for families and businesses and community organizations who choose to call your community home?
But don't you grow into the latter there, Ian? Don't you grow into the, because everyone, as much as people will probably hate me when I say this, everyone has that one issue that they're running on. They may say they have a platform that they're all going to do what they want to do. They have accountability of taxes. We need to upgrade our park system. But there's truly that one issue that everyone runs on. And once that's done, then they grow into the role of saying, oh, now I can effectively do what I need to do to better my community once my issue is done. Do you not grow into that role of being a true statesman in some sense?
Some do, but I'd also push back a little on the question about people run for a particular issue or topic or reason. That a lot of the people I talk to who are kicking tires, when I ask them, what's different about your community? Why do you want to run? What's the issue? It's the generalities are there in terms I want to make my community better. I want to serve the public, all of those sorts of things. But they're not saying, you know what, the main street should have a four-way stop or a traffic light, right? That's not the kind of thing they're doing. And my comment back to them is good. That's not your business, not really stuff you should be doing. And it gets dealt with in the first 6 months. And then what the heck are you going to do for the next 3.5 years? So there are certainly some people who are mad about the noisy dogs, but I think the really good people are, not good's probably the wrong word. Those who have a really good understanding are typically those who think in terms of the good of the whole community. When election comes around and we see websites and brochures that have a series of check boxes on them that say, this is the stuff we're going to do. Well, that's all fine and dandy because that's the current issues. Me as a voter, because I get to vote in a municipal election too, I'm way more interested in, do I trust the person I'm electing to make good decisions about the issues and topics that haven't emerged yet, the ones that show up 2 and 3 years from now? How are they going to respond to the legalization of marijuana a few years ago? How are they going to deal with COVID when that wasn't on anybody's election brochure? But I want to be reasonably confident that those people, ego or not, are going to make good long-term value-laden decisions for the community and going to be able to bring people along with them rather than just the one issue person.
You've just recently written a book about uncivil societies, and unfortunately, as many people may be upset about, councils don't get to pick their own fellow council members. That's the general public, and that means there's going to be a clash of personalities on councils. And we are seeing that in Alberta. We're seeing that across Canada, where personalities clash the moment they get elected because they're elected by the people that they believe they've been told what is right and what's wrong, and it may clash with what a fellow councillor may have. What can candidates do today, a month and a half outside of the actual election day where people are going to put their ballots in the box, to ensure that on October 21st, once the new candidate council is sort of set, that they're not playing this clash of the titans of who is going to win in the end when it comes to the issues that are going to be facing the municipality?
The topic of civility, harassment, abuse, all of those sorts of things is certainly far greater than Alberta municipal politics. It's something we're seeing at all orders of government, in civil society as a whole, and elsewhere. So we can certainly speak about a microcosm of it here that is broadly reflective of global trends. I would say, though, for those people who are interested in getting involved, I think I'm a bit of a Pollyanna on this. I believe most people who put their names on a ballot are doing so for, to me anyway, the right reasons, the reasons that are supporting their communities over the long term. But to me, there are also some things that they need to do and understand. And that a big one, and George has mentioned this quite a few times, not today, but in other places, where he speaks about things like covenants. If you and I collectively or as a council administration pre-agree on how we're going to disagree, we can have those kind of arguments to make a decision richer. So knowing what those rules of engagement are, I think is really useful. So figuring out the decision making, the recognition that nobody's vote has any more impact than anybody else's, at least in Alberta at the moment, whether that's to elect a series of elected officials or whether that's actually making decisions on council. I think there's also a little bit of a difference too. You're talking about they don't get to choose their team, whatever municipality. And when we see some of the larger municipalities where the municipal entity is broken down into smaller groups, divisions, or wards, or those kinds of things, you're absolutely right. I, as an elector, only get to elect somebody in my division or ward. I don't get to choose even my fantasy team. where if I'm electing people with rurally or individual, sorry, not rurally, sorry, if I'm electing people at large, like most municipalities, I am a little bit constructing a team of people who either think like me or I think will work well together. So it behooves the candidates to get their names out there as recognizing as people who can work with other people. So to me, those are some of the ways that we work with that to try and head off the incivility. A little bit of a recognition that there is going to be some give and take, and to have the strong ethical foundational values that are necessary too, because there are, I mean, people are talking about getting accosted in the grocery stores, or the online hate that comes out, or fringe candidates from political entities that really just want to get in and stir things up or really have nothing to offer. Hopefully, the voters are the people who are able to see through that a little bit and still come to the conclusion that, you know what, we need to elect people we think can get along with one another, even if they disagree with one another. So those are some of the, there is literally a book I've written about this, so I don't want to go into all the details because I'm pretty sure George has some opinions on this too, because he's been around, well, probably longer than I've been alive.
Wow,
That's
I'm
not
not
quite
I'm
true, but
not
it's
going
getting.
there. I'm just going to continue on with my line of questions and just leave that hanging over Ian's head for the next half hour.
Yeah, thanks.
George,
Yeah.
you've
Let
been
me
on.
let me add to what Ian has said. I just think, and a lot of really good points. I think if you are going to be effective on the council, I think you need to come in with some degree of focus. And I think without that, everything looks like a winner. Everything sounds like it's a good idea. And so, and as a result of that, after a year, you have council members looking around thinking, just what did we accomplish? And the answer is, well, what did you set out to accomplish? What did you see as being the key issues? And what were you trying to get moving from first base to second base? So I think the councils that lack focus are typically ones that are wandering, they're in trouble. And when they wander, the administration's in trouble because a council that wanders is soon to land in the administrative network, and they're going to start helping department heads and CIOs manage. And you've got the makings of a consultant being brought in to try to help set out clear roles. The second thing, and then Ian has already mentioned, is your ethical standards. I think council that wants to be successful has to have people on it that have an ethical core, that want to do things that are right and they want to do them right. And I think people that come in with a sense of what's there for me. I mean, I've dealt with that where people are talking about, I want to increase my salary. And I said, to me, this whole notion of council compensation is badly addressed. It should be called simply, it's a council honoraria. It is not salary. You should never refer to the salary of a councillor or the mayor, because in most places it is not full time. It is not a salary. You're doing this as a financial pat on the back. So let's drop the whole issue around councillor salary and talk about what it actually is. If it was a salary, you really have demeaned the councillor because they're getting paid about a quarter, or a fifth, or a tenth of the average department head. So what does that tell you? It tells you that that's your worth? Well, I don't think so. Your worth is very high because you're an elected citizen who's there on the basis of an honoraria. So I think you need to make sure that council members have their focus in the right place rather than putting it in the wrong places, including financial interest. I also think you need to have people on council that can say, what's the community interest? Where are we at on this topic? What does the community want us to do? As opposed to, boy, that's a good looking report, makes a whole lot of sense, covers a whole bunch of pros and cons and so on. It's got a good, well sounding recommendation. And then you say yes and hit the plus button, which I recall one of our major cities just did on infill housing, for example. And all of a sudden there's pushback. And everybody's saying, well, who set this plan in place in the first place? And of course, it's the same council that you're looking at. They just hadn't had the practical experience of what happens when you put a plan into motion. And so you need to have people that are there, that are asking the question, which is what I think a good counselor does, and continues to ask the good question. Because I mean, there's a great quote out of the Harvard Business Review 2003, which tells you that my memory is not completely gone. And the quote was, one can lead with no more than a question in hand. To me, it's a marvelous quote, because it really is what a council member can do if they're smart. They can ask good questions at a council meeting and they can drive the agenda. I think, we lose sight of three words that are in our legislation. And Ian had referred to wards and divisions and so on, that, where communities are large and they decided to break themselves up into wards and divisions, which I'm never sure is a brilliant idea, but I realize geographically some of it may make sense. But there's still the three words in legislation that says the council is to govern for the community, quote, as a whole. And you've got council members that are not doing that. They're focused on what's good for my ward or my division. And as a result of that, you have a heck of a time to pull a council together to focus on what's in the best interest of all of us. So I think there's a whole lot of things being said there that between Ian and I just think if you're going to be a successful council member, you're going to have focus, you're going to show respect for others. I've just written an article on that. You need to make sure that you're reflecting the community as a whole, and you need to be saying, are we as a community council, are we adding value to our community?
Well, what does value mean though in 2025? Because the value you think that needs to be brought and the value that someone else who's running that it thinks they can be brought is going to be two different values. And I can imagine, and I'm going to sort of assume here for a second, and I hate assuming on the show, but I'm going to, that you're not the complete expert on what the value of a community is. And I apologize. You are my guest on the show. You are like an idol when it comes to municipal governance, George. But what is the true meaning of value in today's context? Because it's different for everyone.
Well, it is different. And I would make a distinction between my own personal values and what's of value to the community. And I would say that what's of value to the community is that, Chris, did we address community issues, and did we as a council move the yardsticks down the field? Did we make decisions that help the community in a discernible way? What value did we as a council add? Otherwise, for 4 years, what are we doing sitting there simply approving administrative recommendations, telling them to go ahead and get done what they could have done on their own? What value do we add? Yeah. And if we're not asking good questions, if we're not trying to keep an eye on the community and raise tough questions and issues, then I think you're losing value entirely. So if your focus is on yourself, your focus is on satisfying your ego, your focus is on how do I become a much more important person so that the province recognizes me and I'm being seen with the premier and and I could elevate myself and become a MLA or a minister or whatever. I tell people the most important role you're going to have in life outside of your home is that of being a mayor or a councillor, because you're adding value to your own citizens around you. That's both the toughest role as well as the most important ones.
Ian, you've worked with councils across Alberta and you've worked with councils across Canada. And we are coming up to a moment where there's going to be a lot of change over here in the province. A lot of mayors are stepping down. A lot of councillors are stepping down and not running, not reoffering. In those first early days, it is important to hit the ground running. You drink from the proverbial fire hose, as I said. What do you see as some of the biggest pitfalls that new council-elects, new mayors-elect fall into? And how would you suggest they avoid them in those early days?
Wow. I think what your question really just is a summation of what the things we've talked about for the last 40 or 45 minutes. It's about how do we set ourselves up.
It's like, I'm starting to wrap up here, Ian.
Oh, I see. Good for you. Well, George has been all over this topic too, but I would say that a lot of times when people get elected for the first time, they're much more tactical than they are strategic. So to me, pushing them into the place where we can bring a bunch of tactical things together, bump it up a little bit, and then start to look at strategy. Two words we haven't mentioned yet today are strategic plan. So George was just talking about value as expressed success. To me, if we have it written down literally on paper, we can actually now go look 6 months later, a year later, 4 years later, a generation later, and say, how did this group of 5 or 7 or 9 people do in terms of what they hope to be able to do? I have yet to run across an elected official in any sort of contested election who says that they want their community to be exactly the same 4 years from now than it is today. They are always looking at making things bigger, better, faster, whatever the case may be, that growth is good for the sake of growth, all those sorts of things, which I don't necessarily agree with, but they're about change. So that there's something that's happened in this community during the course of the 4 years that's either happened or at least begun to happen is going to have an impact on the next 10 years, next generation, whatever the case may be. I also made a recognition that that they should not try and please everyone. they probably should try and please somebody. Don't try and please everybody, because that's not going to work. It's going to be frustrating, and they still have to be comfortable with their own families. That after the beginning of the day and the end of the day, they're going home to their families, and they need to really look after that relationship with spouses and partners and kids and all the rest of that, because getting too involved down the rabbit hole in any sort of a government can have a real negative impact on families, and we see that quite regularly. The sense of entitlement, I would say, is something we've got to really nip in the bud. Recognizing how much time everything is going to take, that it's going to take all the time available plus 10%. Learning how to participate well in governance level meetings so that we can get rid of the fluff, we can get in, get the business done, and get out. So if you want to have those casual social conversations, you're welcome to do that some other time. One of the big pitfalls that we see is confidential information that doesn't remain confidential. To me, there's that idea about knowledge is power, but it's only power until it's shared. So once it gets shared inappropriately, whether that's done on purpose or not, can have a real damaging impact on the council, on the municipality, on the communities itself. And finally, my last comment would be about just not realizing they need to realize how much time and effort this whole thing is going to take to do the job well. There are people who just kind of get in, go to meetings, go home, and those people lose support quite regularly because they fall out of touch with their communities really quickly. So there's way more involved in this role than people initially think it is just by looking at the legislation.
George, for yourself, do you see any big pitfalls that we're heading into in 2025 that need to be addressed sooner rather than later, so we don't see what we've seen over the course of some municipalities over the last few years happen more often?
I've just done several seminars across the province and elsewhere where I focused on where do we go off the tracks? Where are the pitfalls? And I think one of the greatest pitfalls starts administratively. So I think people like Ian and those of his generation, not me because I'm just about gone, I think you need to get a hold of councils right at the outset and be saying to, or rather management at the outset, and saying, how do you plan to lead your council into this next election? What did you learn from election 4 years ago? And what are you going to do to change to make sure this council is more focused on governance? And so when I talk to administrations, which I've just done recently, I tell them to take all of their orientation material and knock off about 2/3, and they'd probably be close to what it is they should be presenting to their council. I mean, I'm absolutely amazed at the number of places that will still take their council through the water treatment plant. Yeah, that ought to make you.
Why wouldn't they?
Why would they? You want to have them turn the valves and figure out where the pipes go? Why not simply indicate that these are the facilities that we have in our community? We have a plethora of them. Do I need to show you the solid waste site? Do I need to show you the sanitation sewage? Do I need to show you the grass cuttings? Do I need to show you the Zamboni room? I mean, when you get to the Zamboni room, I'm reminded of 4 years ago, I was asked to do the orientation in southern Alberta. And for the community, I said to them, well, send me your normal orientation plan. They sent it to me. And item 1 was introduce council to the members of the public works staff. Honestly, I could have write a book around that one. I mean, so why not just send them pictures along with their email addresses and phone numbers and then wonder what went wrong? You know, honestly, we've got our focus entirely wrong right from the outset, Chris. We need to be saying to good managers across the country, focus council on governance. Ask yourself, why did we elect these people? And it wasn't because we wanted cheap volunteers for your jobs. So let's try to keep them into your jobs, and let's try to realize they've got their own role, not job, but their own role to perform. And how do we help them in their roles? And unfortunately, we drive them in the wrong direction, and we do it in many innocent ways, by the way. I'm not blaming management, but quite frankly, that's where it starts. Management is what puts the materials together. Oh, we're going to have 5 weeks of orientation, or we're going to do it all in 1 week, and here's the stuff we're going to cover. And we're going to make them planners, we're going to make them engineers, we're going to make them recreation directors, we're going to make them public works experts, finance experts, planners. You do all of that stuff to what end? I thought we hired those people. I want to have them govern. I want to have them provide good questioning. I want to have them provide leadership. I want to have them connected to the community. I want to have plans that have a one pager that says what are the goals that affect community that are set by our council. I want a strategic plan, as Ian talked about earlier, that sets out 5 key things we're going to do this year in our community. I don't want this 55-page document written by a consultant that everyone knows about because it's really well written and it's got nice pictures and all that kind of stuff. But it really is not really giving direction on behalf of council. I don't want to find out from some communities, which I have, but we developed a strategic plan 5 years ago and we're still running with that one. Oh, I see. That makes sense. You've elected 2 councils since then, and you're going to go ahead with something that was done 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, talk about priority setting and talk about getting the pulse of this council. I want to know, what does this council want to do? What kind of change do you want to see in our community in 4 years? And let's talk about year 1. What are the 3 or 4 things we're going to get done that are going to show up on every agenda? We're going to have those in front of us, and we're going to try to make sure that we're clear that these are the things we're going to focus our council on, not our administration, our council. What we do instead is we develop really massive administrative proposals and reports and so on that are all well done for the most part, and we're going to have council simply baptize them. Is that it? Like, I think somehow we've missed the mark in terms of where does the council add real value to the community? And I think it's in leadership. I think it's in direction setting. I think it's in policy. I talk to communities that, the people run because they didn't like the policies of the last council. You ask them 6 months later, a year later, what policies have you brought forward to change? And they say, completely lost. They got the same policies that the last 2 or 3 councils have had. To me, those things are wrong, Chris. We need to be saying, where's council's focus? And it sure as heck is not on the water treatment plant. Having the plant is important. Knowing when it should be updated is important. Knowing how much that's going to cost us is important. That we're going to have to go back to the citizens and talk about these things. Knowing that we've got competent people to manage them is important. We've got a CAO that's going to do that. Those are important things, but we lose sight of what's important. We get away from policy, we get away from governance, and we dive into what we know, which is administrivia. And we wonder, where do we lose the council? You lost them right out of the gate. And I talked about the need for a pre-council orientation. You lose them out of the gate because you get their focus in the wrong direction and you never take it off. Because by that time, you're now afraid to tell them, gee, Mr. Mayor, I don't need you in the office of the village, in the mayor's office 5 days a week. Can you imagine? Well, I'll guarantee you there are mayors and villages across Alberta that are there 5 days a week. What are you going to do as a mayor 5 days a week, or a reeve of a county? What are you going to do in the office 5 days a week? Well, you're going to manage the office. Oh, I see. That's what we elected them for. I mean, honestly, some of this is sheer lunacy, and it's been that way, Chris, for quite a while, which has enabled people like the McCormacks and Cuffs of the world to continue to do what they do. And we look at it and we think, geez, it doesn't have to be this way. And when I say I think administration's partly at fault, they are. They need to ask themselves, what are we doing this term to get our council away from administrivia, which is a challenge, by the way, because you've already got them in it, into governance. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, I want popcorn now.
I was going to say, and that's the way George sees it in this episode of Municipal Affairs. But I do have one then final question, and it's about governance, and it's about the advice that you would give any potential new candidate, new council member, new mayor, new reeve who's about to get elected. If you could give one piece of governance advice to every single incoming member of council, whether they be urban or rural, in the province of Alberta, Newfoundland, anywhere across Canada, what would that be? And I'm going to say George first. Actually, no, I'm going to say Ian first because I feel like that's going to be another rant coming in from George. So let's go Ian first and then George.
Yeah, I'm not going to rant on this topic. This maybe is a little bit pedantic, but the piece of advice I would typically have is remember why you're there. That when your community started 100 years ago or whatever it was, there were a bunch of people who chose to live near one another. And they decided they wanted some collective things done. They wanted a road. They eventually wanted water. They wanted baseball diamond, all of those sorts of things. And it got to the point where it was too difficult, too onerous for everybody in town to actually look after that all the time. So they selected a board of directors who became the council and has been there ever since. That council decided they didn't want to look after things 24/7, and we got out of that form of government into the executive government where we've hired somebody to look after the place as an expert from 24/7 as the place grew and got more complex and demands increased and grew and waned as well. But fundamentally, we're all there because we've chosen to live in community with one another. You're there, Mr. and Mrs. elected official, as to mind the shop because we don't have the time to do it, but to look after the best interests of our community. That's kind of what I would say. So it may be a little basic, but that's kind of why I think the municipalities exist where they are in the first place.
George, for yourself, what piece of governance advice would you give to every single incoming councillor, mayor, reeve in the province of Alberta?
I'll close with a very small, short vignette. I was sitting next to a councillor at a council meeting, and there were delegations coming and going, and there were several of them. And the third of three delegations just finished, and they got up from the podium and were walking out of the council chambers. And the councillor sitting closest to me leaned over and said, "Great, now we can get on with business." And I said, "I think it just left." Anyway, I think, and this is a true story. I think that the one piece of advice I would say, and I'm going to stretch it, I'll make it two because Ian raised a really good point earlier. The first piece of advice is I would constantly have this question in front of me above my desk or whatever I spend more of my time. Who am I serving? And the second one that I would probably be looking at is, am I focused on the right things? Who am I serving? And am I focused on the right things? And I am not sure that we have ever got people focused around those two things. When I think about it, I think, and allow me a third point, have I kept an eye on home? I had a sense after 12 years that I needed to slip a picture of myself under the front door so the dogs wouldn't bark when I came in. You needed, because you get so caught up in this, Chris. It is ego fulfilling. It is demanding. It's challenging. It's interesting. It's all of those things. And you get so caught up in that, you can be still a full-time employee somewhere else, which I was the whole 12 years that I was mayor. I was still a full-time employee of my own firm. But at the same time, I was trying to be the mayor mornings, noon hours, evenings, weekends. You'll notice I never used the word family. And therein lies the challenge. You need to end up a term or 12 years or whatever with the same number of family members at the end as at the beginning. And without keeping some focus on that, you can lose it. So I would say, who am I serving? Am I figured around how I add value? And am I keeping my own family in mind? Thanks for your probing questions.
No, I appreciate George and Ian for sitting down with us and talking about this. The links to every single one of the books that they have written that we talked about in this conversation will be in the show notes. If you're watching this on TV, please head over to the crossborderinterviews.ca website, and the links to directly buy their books from all the sources that you can buy them will be there. So I highly recommend you check them out. This is an important election. Get out, get engaged, and please be informed before you cast your ballot, because we do not want to end up in 4 years' time thinking, where has the municipality grown? George, Ian, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome, Chris.
Bless you. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's roundtable discussion and gained some valuable insights into the world of municipal politics. To be sure to keep up on all the latest episodes of Municipal Affairs, Alberta Municipal Votes 2025, and cross-border interviews, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platforms or by visiting us on YouTube at Cross Border Network. Now, your support means the world to us, so share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Till next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly.